right, thank you, everyone. So it's my distinct pleasure now to introduce a man that truly needs no introduction, which would make my job real easy. And of course, is today's keynote speaker, Representative George Miller. I would hazard a guess that Representative Miller is known to everyone in this room. I would also guess that regardless of our own particular spot on the political and ideological spectrum, there's little doubt of his dedication to and service to the nation, its schools, and its students in a career of government service that spans 4 decades. George Miller was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1974 at the age of 29. Makes a lot of us feel like underachievers. And since then, he's won re-election 19 times. He served California's 11th district, previously the 9th district, with distinction for 40 years. A stalwart champion of liberal and progressive policies, Representative Miller has also earned a reputation as a principled legislator who reaches across the aisle to find compromise and to build common cause in the service of his constituents and the nation as a whole. Miller has authored major legislation dealing with labor, the economy, the environment, among other issues. But perhaps nowhere is his legacy more evident, especially to those gathered here today, than in his contributions to education and the nation's schools. A bit of trivia for some of you. Representative Miller, his first committee assignment upon joining the House in 1974 was to the Education Committee, and the rest, as they say, since then is history. Miller, currently the ranking member and former chair of the Education Workforce Committee, has been an architect of key laws that have shaped our times and the lives of countless students and educators. Among them, of course, the No Child Left Behind Act, the Higher Education Act, and parts of the economic stimulus that went on to become the Race to the Top and Investing in Innovation I3 programs. When Representative Miller announced his plans to retire at the end of this term, a lot of people had a lot to say, as you can imagine. But I was particularly struck by one statement, and to quote, "For 4 decades, George Miller has been a fierce advocate in Congress for students and workers." And going on to note Miller's unique contribution and combination of talent and passion, the quote continues, "It's hard to see anybody filling his shoes." Now, what struck me was not so much what was said, not that that isn't all true, but who said it. So that quote was from Representative John Klein of Minnesota, Miller's Republican counterpart and House chair of the House Education Committee. And I think Representative Klein's sentiments really sum it up pretty nicely. So please join me in welcoming to the stage now Representative George Miller.
How are you? Oh, I'm on the mic. Thank you.
Representative Miller?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I'll just jump right into questions. You have been a leading force on education for, as we heard, 4 decades. So what was the best moment? What are you most proud of after these nearly 40 years in Congress?
Well, I think it's hard because I've had such wonderful opportunities and successes, but I think for me, the involvement, the passage of, and the continuation of is a landmark piece of legislation, what was then known as Education of All Handicapped Children. Because you have to, some of you are much younger than, almost everybody here is much younger than I am. At that time, in many parts of the country, children with what we would today consider very, essentially somewhat minor disabilities could be barred from public schools, and were. And today, when I walk into the disabilities community, almost anywhere in the country, I'm confronted with people who are college graduates, who have their own businesses, who are lawyers, doctors, who are reporters. I mean, they're in every part of our economy and our society, and yet there was a time when they couldn't get the basic key to participation, which was an education. And to me, that access and to see them, and so many of them are personal friends, is just one of the most exciting things that has happened to me. And I think it set the stage for my sense of, I hadn't realized. I went to school, they threw me out, but it wasn't for those reasons. I had a lot of trouble in K through 12, but I didn't realize that people were actually, by law, or at least what appeared to be a law, barred from the opportunity in education, and that access and the rights, and then growing up, of course, around the civil rights period, that sort of became my touchstone in everything I did in education.
All right.
So that was a big one for me.
So, okay, if you had one do-over over the last 40 years, something that you could go back and change, what would you do? What would it be?
I don't know, and that's sort of like, what do you think, you're superhuman or something? I think I don't have many of those, or what I think of those, because to me, if you fail, that's why they built in tomorrows in the Earth schedule. But that's what tomorrow's about. And in legislation, you have to be prepared to fail many, many times. You look at many things that I've been involved in, whether it's in the environment or with children in the big sense. Some of it took me 10, 15 years. And I see some of it now that I did 25 years ago that I'm in a knockdown, drag-out fight on in environmental issues before this Congress closes. So in this arena, I guess I never had that sense of finality. Well, we missed that. To me, again, that's what tomorrow's about. You miss that today, you get a chance tomorrow. I don't know how to figure it out, but that's the opportunity that's there, which is a great thing about the job.
All right. Well, we were talking backstage, and you were telling me that in some ways the atmosphere on Capitol Hill has become really more poisonous and partisan at this point than really at any other part of your career.
I just discovered that.
Yeah.
Just today.
Just today. And he's the first to remark on that.
Slow burner.
And I'm just wondering, when did you see that shift start to happen? Do you think that situation can change? And what would it take? What's it going to take to really change this atmosphere?
Well, if everybody just lived up to their comments that they made the night of the election and the 3 or 4 days after the election, we'd probably be home free in the next session of Congress. But we know the reality of this place. I don't have, there was a long period of time. You can go back and you can document that, to me, the most visible point in terms of this history was Newt Gingrich really deciding that the Republicans at that time, in the minority when I came to Congress and when he came to Congress later, were comfortable. And he didn't like that. He said, you'll never be in the majority. And so they started ones and twos being confrontational on the floor. And then today it's come full circle. Some people would even suggest that some of the reforms that we did in our class in 1974 when you were all in elementary school, that breaking down the seniority system, breaking down some of the rules in the Congress have led to some of this. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't just happen in the last 2 years. There's been a drift in the Congress, and it's diminished the legislative process in my mind. It's diminished the full participation of so many members, because when the leadership on either side of the aisle decide they're going to go, they then go to Rules Committee, tell the Rules Committee to draft the bill this way, and then they bring it to the floor with a couple of hours debate or 1 hour debate or 3 days notice, whatever it is, and then you're voting up or down. And we had a much, it doesn't sound in times of instantaneous media and social media and all the rest of it, but the idea that you would spend a week maybe debating, I mean, we still see some of that in the Senate, but a week debating the nuances of national education policy. No, now you get an hour. I don't think that works in a big, diverse democracy like America.
So when Secretary of Education Arne Duncan was picked, you were really excited because you wanted a disruptor in the role of Secretary of Education. So at this point, okay. So it sounds like you think he's lived up to that. Can you talk a little bit more about, how you see his tenure?
Oh, I think he clearly has lived up to it. And you have to remember when he came here, we were already had maybe 3 of the 4 wheels in the mud, certainly around the reauthorization of NCLB. We were going nowhere. Congressman McKeon and I worked very hard. Alice, thank you. Worked very hard to put a discussion draft out, and we got shot by, from all points on the compass. And I think that the secretary had to make a decision on behalf of the president. Were you going to continue to work in this bog when education, we knew how disgruntled people were with some of the impacts of No Child Left Behind, but there wasn't a way to free them. And so he could wait for the Congress, and he would be waiting still today, 6 years later. So they decided to act with the waivers and the race to the top. And I think it was the right decision from an incoming administration. I think, in fact, almost any decision, the waivers may be, but almost any incoming administration looking at what has taken place in the history of this issue would have decided we can't live waiting for these people to make up their mind. It just won't work. That's just not going to work on an issue that's as much in play every day in the discussion of our economy or of our social situation in America.
So, despite those kind words for Secretary Duncan, you've definitely given him some pushback on the impact of waivers on poor and minority kids, students in special education, English language learners. You were also really critical of the administration's decision to give California a double testing waiver, which really, a lot of people said, exempted the state from, this entire school year, basically, from accountability. Are those two issues, are those still concerning to you? Do you feel like those are sort of lower points in the Obama administration's tenure?
My concern is sort of, it's consistent with the first question. My concern is what happens while people are making up their minds, while they're road testing exams, while they're doing all these things. What happens to this fourth grade student or third grade student that spent that year in school and we don't know how they're doing, and now they're in fourth grade or fifth grade, and we don't know if they're a year behind or not because the way what we do with most testing and its lack of timeliness and information and all the rest of that, what's happening to that student? I thought at a minimum that the information from the test should be accessible for schoolers so they can see what maybe they can judge how they were doing, not for the purposes of deciding whether this was adequate yearly progress or whatever, how you want to, denote the progress, but so they would be better informed about the next series of tests. But they decided and the districts were asking for this, not again for the use of hard data to make judgments on, but to see how they were doing and could they be better prepared for the next year. But that's it.
So getting back to waivers, actually, which is sort of, more on that topic, I'm wondering, what do you think that waiver renewal guidance should look like? If you were designing it yourself, what would you have the department?
Well, I go right back. It's sort of, I sound like Johnny One Note here, but to me, the question is, will these waivers make sure that districts are accountable for all of the children in their system? Remember, the big surprise after No Child Left Behind was how many districts were hiding children from assessments. We're giving kids field trips to the zoo or telling parents this is a good time for your doctor's appointment. They're excluding these young people from the system. And so that's my concern. I mean, it just continues to be there. That's got to be the focal point. Mm-hmm. That has to be the focal point. That's the responsibility. That's the civil rights aspect of this. What's happening to my opportunity at a first-class education, mm-hmm. To a real educational opportunity, and I can't let that get lost in this shift.
So you've said that No Child Left Behind is, at its core, a civil rights law. Do you think that A, reauthorization can move in this Congress with sort of the set of players we have coming in, and B, that it can maintain that distinction, that it can continue to be that these folks who are in Congress, these folks in the administration, can put together a bill that will be a civil rights law, in your view?
I don't think there's much denial, whether you're on either side of the aisle, about that aspect of, mm-hmm. of this. I don't think you're going to go back to a time when you think you can deny access to a quality education, given what the Supreme Court said 40 years ago, and the Civil Rights Act of 50 years ago, and what other courts have ruled in different state situations, that you're going to go back there. I don't think that's it. I think the real question is going to be about implementation and about this question of if you have a good accountability system, if you in fact make sure, and that's why those letters that we've sent recently were signed by the tri-caucuses, because they're very nervous about what happens to English learners and students with disabilities and poor children and minority children in these districts. If you keep that in mind and you really have a system that works, then in fact you can have the second discussion, which is what about devolving some of the implementations to the state and local government. And I think you're seeing that process to some extent, them getting ready for that idea in the waiver process. And you'll also remember the reaction that our committee had across the board, from left to right, on the idea that there were four, what the hell do they call them, four,
School improvement grant?
you know, the 4 ways you could improve,
SIG models.
Yeah, SIG models.
Yeah.
You know, across the board, left to right, said, whoa, who are you saying that this is the only 4? You know, but I think that depends upon how comfortable you are with the integrity of the curriculum, of the assessments, and of the accountability for that. And so I think that's a trade-off that, again, I think on both sides of the aisle, people are going to be very willing to look at. They can't fudge on the integrity side of it. That's what they can't fudge on, because that's owned by the parents. Because the parents want to know how their child is doing this year, how did they do last year, and what are the expectations we have for next year. And what you see, even in this last political round here a week ago, you see parents' voices rising in communities. I certainly see it in California with the contest that we had over state superintendent, with the implementation of the parent trigger law, with the Vergara lawsuit. That's about parents saying, who's going to give me the answers of how my children are doing? Where do I go to get these? I couldn't get them before No Child Left Behind, and then when I got them in under No Child Left Behind, I got them in a newspaper, and I can compare my schools, but nothing else happened. Nothing else happened. And so I think that, to me, would be that question of, are you really prepared to keep serious integrity into that process as a trade-off for then giving schools the flexibility and build on what many of them are doing today.
So that actually was a great segue into my next question, which is, what do you think the big takeaways were from this California superintendent's race?
I think, excuse me.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Dealing with a politician
like
here, I don't have time
no,
for the question. I already have the answer made up in my mind.
Go for it.
We don't do this in Congress. Got to wait for the question.
Well, I'll just ask really quickly then. Was Marshall Tuck's loss, it was kind of billed as this big setback for reporters? I'm sorry, for reformers, not reporters.
Reporters.
It was excellent for reporters to be able to cover a very exciting education race. So basically, should folks see it that way? Should they see it as a loss to the reform crowd, or should we celebrate that this, or should reformers celebrate that this victory, the margin of victory, was so close?
I don't know if anybody would be celebrating at this point, but I think clearly the margin of victory was very close. But again, I want to build that there's a certain continuum taking place here in California, and we went from the parent trigger to being absolute rebellion to now people assuming that it's their right, and then the question is, that becomes a negotiating point with whether or not this school or this school district is going to pay attention to our children, and we have a voice in the results. And I think that's the progression that you saw play out here over the last many months, culminated in the superintendent's race, but all of these other things were in that conversation. And I spent a lot of time in schools, a lot of time, and that conversation is very big. So I think it's all a positive.
There's also been a lot of interest lately in this idea of staggered testing or grade span testing, or at the very least, substituting local test for state tests. I know you ran into that in 2007 when you were putting together your discussion draft. Is that a policy that you would support? And what do you see as the potential pitfalls there?
I think you better be very, very careful, and I don't know that these suggestions are really answers. I go back to sort of the fundamentals, and the fundamentals is, do you have a good assessment system? And does that assessment system inform the teacher, the school, and others about how they're doing with the curriculum. I'm assume a good curriculum. Then what is it that you can then do with that assessment system in terms of informing parents or rethinking how you might be doing this subject or that subject or grade levels, what have you? Under No Child Left Behind, remember, we're prohibited by law of mandating. So we said, whatever test you're giving, tell us how the kids did.
Yeah.
Right? Well, they had a test that admittedly was not designed for that purpose. And so then there was this scramble, and whether it was a bad test or bad performance, in spite of the test, whatever it was, then they started, reconfiguring, and then we all went through the history of dumbing down and all of the problems that were there. So I think that you got to go back to the integrity of that process, and grade span, and that's all interesting. But again, maybe some ability to do formative assessments so that the teacher's informed about the progress of the student, the parent can be informed about the progress of the student, and the student can be informed about the progress. But if you start grade span, I question whether, certainly in the early years, whether too much time, and let's not pretend like we're all doing a crackerjack job. There's kids that are in terrible learning situations, and those have to be improved. And the idea that, well, you're going to step out the accountability system doesn't make sense. I don't think that can be justified given the situation that, again, poor, minority, and others students are the situation they're in many schools in this country. So I don't know if the worry is as assessments get better, then that gets immediately connected to teacher evaluation or what have you. There's a lot of reasons why you might or might not be for grade span or again, I'm amazed that, even that we simply said, whatever test you give, we like to have the results, and we'd like to have those results for every child in the system, and you have to test them all. That we've now gone in some jurisdictions to have 15, 16 tests that nobody can tell you why they're connected or how they inform one another, or even if you had the most collaborative school in the world, what is it the teachers would learn from these 16 tests about what they're doing? They'd learn they're all busy teaching, around the exam. So I'd spend a lot of time looking at that solution before you bought it.
So one last question before we throw it open to the audience.
Any question?
Oh, well, I'm just wondering, what's next for you? You are, how are you going to continue to contribute to this debate and this discussion?
I guess what I'd like to do, there's no way you can recreate your life in the Congress, to me, which has just been one of the great rides possible for a person who's engaged in issues and that. But what I'd like to do is pursue my passions in some other venue where I could continue to have some impact on the outcomes and have the excitement of being engaged in that fashion. So I don't know. My passions are children and the environment and working men and women, and we'll see what happens. I don't know.
All right. So I'd just like to open it to the audience for question and answer, if anybody has a question. If not, I have plenty more.
That's like I get an A if there's no questions.
There's one in the back.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Hi, Cheryl O'Connor from George Mason University. So the last panel was asked about whether they really think that reauthorization will happen, say, in the next year. So assuming that Congress does choose to move forward in that direction, what kind of advice would you have for them in moving forward on reauthorizing?
You know what members of Congress really hate is advice from former members.
That's what you're telling us, not them necessarily.
Yeah, I can write the letter to the editor. I just got to get somebody else to sign it. I think the advice is clear. Everybody in play here has a lot of experience in this field. Whether we've successfully got a reauthorization bill or not is not always due to the players of that field. There's another game going on, overarching this in the Congress and between the administration and the rest of that. I think, I mean, again, I go back to my guidepost. If you really have confidence, I think that everyone in that room would acknowledge the role of the federal government in making sure about access and equal opportunity to this education, a good education. And after if you really build the integrity into that system, a lot of things that you were so afraid to let go of, and I know the Republicans might not want to hear this, but in fact, you know, the waivers and others have probably been a way to iron out some kinks and take another look at that and forget that it's done under waivers, but is this something that would be acceptable? Does this have integrity? And will we get the information that we need and let them be a greater participant in the design? I don't know where I mean, unless for a small group of people who believe the federal government has no role. Well, I don't know what those Title I schools will do if there is no role. I know everybody says, you know, it's only 6%. You know, you guys are only contributing 6, 7, 8% or something like that. But in those Title I schools, that's very important money. And the increased flexibility that has been granted over time has been very important. But that's been based upon the idea that we're going to have accountability so that we could get to improving the performance, the graduation rates of the schools and of those children. I don't know that that's, you know, if you have this data, and given the fact that No Child Left Behind drove so much of the data, if you have this data, and the data hopefully is much better today than it was then, and it is, then you can start to really think about how you devolve some of this. But that investment of those federal dollars is there to achieve that opportunity and that access to that opportunity. And you can't lose sight of that. But that's not hard, just not having school districts violate the constitutional rights of children. That's kind of bold print. And so, you know, this is all doable. This is all doable. There's atmospherics beyond any issue in the Congress that control the dynamics of that issue. I mean, I've been here 40 years, and it's not like we had all the softball issues of my first 25 years here, you know. You struggled with it all. It was all doable. Did George Miller get everything he wanted? Did Ted Kennedy get everything he wanted? You know, no. But we figured out how to do it. We figured out the best we could. And that's why we have reauthorization dates, because it's not like all those decisions were perfect. And we learned from that. So the atmospherics will have more to do with it than the personalities involved. I, in fact, think, you know, I'm very proud of the membership on my side of the aisle. I mean, you know, I've tried to give every one of them maximum exposure, participate in the committee. I think they're ready for reauthorization. Their interest is deep. I look at the list of people who've already expressed an interest in getting on the committee. I'm really complimented that the committee holds that stature, that people are aggressively trying to fill whatever slots will be available. So it's all doable. It's quite doable.
We have another question from online. Can you please expand on what you believe would happen in schools if testing was limited?
What do you think would happen in schools if testing?
It would be sort of like driving blindfolded with no speed limits. I mean, I don't get it. You know, parents want to know how their children have done. It was maybe simpler in my life. I came home with the Friday spelling test, right? That was a big event around the dinner table. You missed 4 out of 10. You know, we want to know how our children are doing. And fortunately, the assessment system has grown much more sophisticated and can inform more parties to that discussion. So I don't understand why would you do this? So why we would just have a child enter in kindergarten and graduate in 12th grade, and we say, thank you, thanks, pretty good for you, looking up. I mean, in some areas you can argue that that's the system, because the top 25%, they'll figure out how to get to where they need to go. But for others, there's a whole set of circumstances that make that more difficult, both in school and outside of school. And put on your blindfold and step on the gas. We'll assess you at the end. I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Do we have any other?
We see the positive impact of increased data in so many parts of our society. You can disagree with it. You don't have to accept it. But it informs us. And for, certainly for politicians, say, well, we don't need any of this data. They're polling freaks. Maybe just give the politicians the data. Yeah, stop. See why I'm leaving? I got to get out of here before they catch me.
Hi, my name's Della Cronin. I'm with Washington Partners. I think we're spending a lot of time talking about the next Congress, but you still have a few days left in your current job. And there's some cats and dogs out there that we're all sort of watching. What are your predictions for what might get done education-wise for the remainder of this year? I think we are all thinking about the Ezra bill, the CCDBG, and of course, the spending bill.
Yeah, I think the child care bill will probably get done this session. I don't know what the spending bills will, I don't know. That's above my pay grade, and it's a politics and another ring of Saturn that has little to do with education. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of different scenarios on the ground right now, but that most of that's all interaction between the administration and what that knocks out of contention or not. I think it's a little early to tell. I think you'll have a lot more information next week than this week.
Alice.
Now, you'd be good to me.
So I have a question, to your point that there's a lot of people in the room here. There's a lot of people in the room here who were in elementary school when you got elected 40 years ago.
Well, that makes me feel really good.
Or maybe in kindergarten.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's a serious question. And that is for people who are sort of entering, their career and still have their trajectory trying to improve policy ahead of them. Like, what's the best advice you can give for the folks who still have the 40 years ahead of them on this, as you look back?
And being engaged I think, my sense is that we're sort of standing on the cusp of one of the most exciting times we could have in education. Those of you who know me know that, I've spent a lot of time looking at trying to think about certainly the role of technology in education. And I think with much wider acceptance now that collaboration's to be done during school hours instead of after school, along with all the other, with yard duty and recreation, all the other things, that you really now have the possibilities. And why I spend time in schools is that the schools in my area that are really pushing this idea, and to see the excitement of those teachers with the ability to sit down and to bring different let's just say curricula, for lack of, I don't want to say data or whatever, but bring different programs or information to how an English teacher and a history teacher and a biologist are going to get together to discuss the history of an Indian reservation. That's it. And to see that sort of same combination getting together and bringing information from the National Science Foundation to this discussion, or bringing information from the Smithsonian to this discussion, and to say this is how we're going to design this. This is what we're going to do. I think you really have the best opportunity we've had to really empower teachers in terms of their ability to dramatically change the teaching environment that's much more in sync with the students, and I think you have the ability to really dramatically change the learning environment that's more in sync with the students, and I think that's just critically important when there's so much competition for everyone else's attention, and I think it lets us, I remember I was once keeping track of all of the great studies that come out of the education community and books and the rest of it, and almost every one of them there was this long lament about the agrarian calendar, yada, 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 the industrial design, yada, 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 so change it. Now you have this opportunity. And I think, I'll go back again, I think that waivers and this have allowed people to think anew. And we're not there by any means, and the opportunity isn't equal in every school or every district. And I worry when we see, what's playing out with hardware and that sort of thing. But the promise is there. And in my quick running around talking to some teachers that have been engaged in the assessments of Common Core and elsewhere, and students, I'm, of course, it's always, they say the difference between Washington and outside the Beltway. The excitement, the positive nature of it, we've had glitches in hardware, all that. Still, you can see students sort of talk. I like the way they asked the questions. I like that they made you think about this. I like this. Was it hard? Yes, it was hard. I don't know, it was kind of hard, yeah. But you can see how this is possible. And just think of what it means if both that learning environment and that teaching environment come together, and what kind of multiplier there is in that school day, and what it means in terms of the possibilities. And I've always imagined this, since that a teacher's and a principal are a little bit like an orchestra conductor. You got a little more over here and a little less here, move here, you move here. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. But we all have met people who really, but think of now if that's really enhanced and you've engaged the interest of all of these students throughout that entire period, although they may be interested at somewhat different levels on different topics, and yet they're coming together for the same purpose. So to me, I think this would be the time, the recession was really hard on people forming this decision. Why would you stay here if they're going to lay you off? Boom, But I think that this is the time that you'd want to be in that vanguard of that next iteration of engaging this environment, because the possibilities are really quite remarkable for the professionals throughout the field, in the entirety of this education community.
All right. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Congressman Miller.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So our time is just about out. I'd like to thank Congressman Miller again for joining us today, as well as my colleagues at Education Week, our friends Brandon, Frank, and everyone at Gallup who made this event possible. Pearson, our sponsor for the event today. And a very special thanks to you, everybody who's here in the room and joining us online. You've been an important part of this conversation, and we couldn't have done it without you. I want to give a couple of reminders. A reminder for your colleagues and friends who are not here today and were not able to tune in online. The event will be live streamed on edweek.org, so be sure to check it out after the fact. We've had a wonderful afternoon of really deep discussions, but I think the further we get into the day, the more it whets our appetite for even more discussion. And so I think it's clear we're facing as a field a lot of really kind of challenging moments. And there's a really important couple of years coming up now. So I know we'll all keep on following these issues. Feel free to kind of weigh in online on social at the EdElect 2014 hashtag. As we heard, especially in the roundtable panel, there's lots of good information out there, whether it comes from our kind of panelists, whether it comes from the work Gallup does on kind of government politics and culture and education. Education Week, as you may know or may not know, has a little publication. And so I'd encourage you all to stay engaged in these issues. I know you will. Thank you for joining us today, and maybe we'll see you again in 2016. Thanks a lot.